This morning, we're going to continue. We started a series last week called Remembering Our Roots that we're kind of going through. And what I started with is this, is there are things in our lives that become so commonplace that we forget how amazing they really are. So as they become more common to us on a day-to-day basis, we start to take them for granted because we just kind of go, oh, they're just there. But we often forget to go, man, that's amazing we actually have that. Last week, I mentioned some amazing things that we have forgotten about. I mentioned babies. How amazing they are, trees, the internet, cell phones, flying, and how they've all become commonplace where we forget to respect how amazing they really are. Today I want to give you a few more things that are so commonplace that we forget how amazing they really are. Here's just some of them. The first one up here are toilets. Okay? Toilets are amazing to have in your house. How many of you have at least more than one toilet in your house? Okay. The thought of toilets is amazing. You got to understand this. 1920 is when they started to become mainstream in a common home. 1920. So they've only been around for less than 100 years in the common home. Could you imagine not having a toilet in your own home? How many of you ever went to the outhouse and wait, I've been to an outhouse, okay? It's horrible. But how many of you didn't have an inside restroom and actually you had an outhouse at one point? Oh my, yeah, see? That's stunning too. I couldn't live in that world. I'm so thankful God made me born in 1975 instead of then because I couldn't live in that world. But toilets are amazing. Another one, air conditioning. Okay? Another thing we take for granted is our ability to control the temperature and the environment of anywhere we are now. 1902 is when air conditioning was first invented. In 1931 was the first window unit that was somewhat similar to that. It was the first window unit. It actually would have sold for in current day dollars for $120,000 one unit. $120,000 one unit in 1931. By 1950, it became mainstream. Be honest with you, being a northerner most of my life, for 30 years of it, we got along with no air conditioning. And there's times that you wish you would have had it, but we got along with. Down here, I don't know how people survived. I don't know. In the summers here, I don't know how people could survive without air conditioning, because here, you just try to get from place to place to place that has air conditioning all summer long, so you don't have to be out in the elements. But air conditioning is amazing, even though we take it for granted today. Electricity is another one of those big things. Everything we have that's in our lives runs on electricity and our ability to harness it and control it. If we didn't have it, nothing here today exists except for us and our bodies. That's it. And we're really boring when we're just by ourselves. So you take the lights away, the screen, it's a much more boring atmosphere. Everything we have runs on electricity, but we take it for granted because this is around us all the time. Access to food. This is one that still amazes me. As you go to a grocery store, and this is what I was thinking about, there are about 650, a little bit more than that, people in this metro Tulsa area. Okay, 650,000 people in this Detroit metro area. Yet none of us are farmers. And we get food whenever we want it. Is that not amazing? If you think about the processes that have to be taking place to fill up our grocery stores to feed a population base like ours, that's amazing. Just the amount of stuff that has to happen to make that happen so that you show up and you have whatever pick of stuff you want is literally amazing. But it's become commonplace and we go, it doesn't amaze us anymore, but it should. The last one, remote controls. All right, now, there's a segment in here, about probably a quarter of you, a fifth of you have always had remote controls. I actually did grow up in a time where we didn't have remote controls, and you had to step up every time and go click the channels. Remember that? It was horrible. There wasn't like skipping through commercials because you're like, if I get up to go through the commercial, I got to walk across the room, and I have to turn the dial, or we actually had like a touch one that was kind of cool at one point that you could touch, and it would change the channels. But if you had water on your hands and you left water on it, then it would keep flipping through, and you thought like your TV was possessed, and you're like, oh, it's water on it, and you'd wipe it off. But so remote controls actually until the 1980s were not common with TVs. Now they're like the greatest thing ever invented. The rest of those things are minor. I can live without a toilet, but take the remote control away, it makes life pretty miserable. They're just things that have become commonplace that are amazing, that we have forgotten how amazing they really are. Now, last week, I mentioned this process of getting familiar with things where we lose our amazement for it, and I told you this, that it also carries over to our view of God and our view of our relationship with God and our spiritual lives as well. So throughout this series, what we're doing is we're remembering our roots in order to remember just how amazing our God is. So last week, we specifically focused on remembering who God is. And I told you he's eternal. And I talked about just the intellectual process that determines that he is the intellectual creator of everything we know, that he is the creator of the entire universe and the things that we can see, touch, smell, everything. He is that creator. And we also talked about what's more amazing is that he cares for us, that this eternal, intelligent being cares for us, that are small, minute little things. And I asked you last week to go out at some point during the week and to stare into the night sky and look at the universe and the stars and remember how small you are, because then you remember how valuable you actually really are. So today, we're going to remember who we are. We're going to switch up a little. Last week we looked at God. This week we're going to look at us as humans, who we are, and remember who we are. Now, you might be sitting there going, I know exactly who I am, so why are we covering this? But I would say this. I would say most of us really don't have a clear understanding of who we are anymore because of all the mixed messages that we receive throughout our lives. We are told at one time in our lives that we are just a random accident. At other times, we are told that we are created by God. At another time, we are told that we have no value. At other times, we are told we have incredible value. Sometimes we're told that we have no responsibility for actions, and sometimes we're told we are solely responsible for actions. At times, we're told we're a mess, and at other times, we are told that we are wonderful. Depending on the environment that you've grown up in, depending on the people you've been surrounded by, we have heard every different message you can hear about who we are as individuals. Today, I'm going to clear up some of those things for you, some of those issues, and let you know exactly who you are. And to understand that, there's three things that you have to clearly understand, and that's what I want to cover this morning. The first thing you need to understand who you are is this. You need to understand that you were created, okay? That you were created. Now, this flies in the face of what we are told most of our lives in our society anymore, unless you attended church. If you grew up in church, you were told differently, which is you were created by who? God. You were created by the intelligent designer we talked about last week if you grew up in church. But if you grew up in our society today, most of the time you're not going to hear that you were created by God. You're going to hear that you might be a random chance of just accidents that took place. There are those in our society today who are dedicated to convincing us that we were not created beings, that we are just a result of random events that took place over millions and billions and trillions of years. But let me just walk you through how that plays out in our society. How that plays out is this. Throughout the history of the world, there are those who deny the logical conclusion, as we talked about last week, of a creator, of a God. And when they deny his existence, what happens is they have to come up with some other narrative to explain life, to explain how they are here, so they come up with another narrative. Now, the name most of you know is Darwin. How many of you know the name Darwin? Okay? Darwin is the most famous name you know, but he wasn't the first one actually to come up with the theory of evolution. He wasn't the guy that started that. If you go back to actually Greek and Roman writings, we can even see some scholars and all who back then thought about the concept of evolution. But what you saw throughout history was this. It was always kind of like a sideshow. It was always this thing that society went, that's just too crazy. It doesn't fit common sense. It doesn't fit with what we see. And it was always kind of a sideshow for thousands of years. What changed with Darwin is in 1859, he wrote the book called The Origins of Species. Okay? And he wrote this book, and for the first time, what he did is he made this theory of evolution actually sound smart. He made it sound intelligent. He made it sound scientific, is what he did. And what you see from that time is that he established a couple of things that had to be true. And number one was this, that small things become big things. Small changes become big changes. So a frog could become an elephant over the second foundational thing, which is this, over vast periods of time. So that small things become big things over vast periods of time. Small changes become large changes over huge expanses of time. And so when that was created, then it was on for a race to go, we have to discover those two truths. We have to build these foundations. And what you have seen is over the years, this theory of evolution has taken over almost the entire scientific community. It has totally taken it over. And if you disagree with the theory of evolution, here's what you are. You're an idiot. Okay? In our society today, if you don't believe in evolution, you are considered an idiot. If you happen to be in the scientific field you disagree with it, you're not just an idiot, you're actually a heretic. And you might go, no, that's not how it works. Actually, God gave me a gift this week. It was beautiful. On Wednesday, this actually came out, and I get to use my laser pointer today. I will show you how this plays out even in the scientific community. Give me the next slide. This week, there was a group of scientists, 3 Chinese and 1 American, that did a research paper. And basically what their research is they were studying how we pick up stuff and all the movements and the things that take place just for us to simply pick things up with our hand. And they wrote a paper over several years, and they did this whole study on this. And they published this paper, and it was peer-reviewed. So it means other scientists in the field looked at it, studied their stuff, and they did the right processes and all this. Peer-reviewed. It was published in a very respectable science journal here. It was published on their website, and this was published on Wednesday. By Wednesday night, they had death threats coming to them. They had threats that they were going to shut down the entire magazine and that they were going to discredit everything else they publish. And the reason for this is this. 2 times in their entire paper, they referenced the possibility of a creator. And what their reference was this. As they studied the hand and all the mechanisms that take place, they said in their paper 2 different times, the only thing that can really explain all this with what we're finding out is there was a design, there was creator, something created this. And they give 2 vague references to a creator. When they read this on the website and in their magazine, the people flipped out and basically went, we will destroy your magazine. They were getting death threats. So 2 days later, by Friday, as you can see here, here's the actual website. Up here you can see what they studied. Here's the journal. And you can see they've retracted it now and took it off their website. And here's at the bottom, right down here, right underneath here, here's what they wrote. The editors apologize to readers for inappropriate language. The inappropriate language was this. They reference a creator. Inappropriate language in the article and the errors during the evaluation process. The errors in the evaluation process, they're not talking about the study and the work the scientists did. It was the fact that the editors let this get published with the words creator in it. And they went, that can't happen. You guys made errors. And they apologize because they will be shut down if they don't. And they nixed the whole thing, and now they've just said, we messed up. We should have never let this get published. Nobody refutes the work they did. Their anger is that they used the word creator 2 different times in about a 500-page document. 2 times they mentioned the word creator, and it got it shut down. Okay, that's the world we are living in. So what I'm going to do this morning is where I'm going to spend the most time is on point number 1, which is this, that you were created. Because what I want you to know is this, and I want to reassure you this morning, you are created beings by that infinite almighty God that we talked about last week. It is undeniable. So let me walk you through how I know that. And the way I know that is looking at the evolution process, which is the competing chain of thought, looking at that and going, this doesn't make any sense. Let me show you where it doesn't. Evolution, first off, rejects the scientific law of biogenesis. Now, you can get a little science lesson this morning. I love this stuff because I study science and all the time, so this is up my alley. But here's what you will find is it denies the law of biogenesis. Now, this is a scientific law, and what a scientific natural law means is this is as close as it gets to something being a fact and something that can't be debated, okay? So the law of biogenesis says this: living cells only come from pre-existing living cells. So for Jeff to be over here, it would be assumed logically that there was something living before him that gave life to Jeff. Okay? That's what the natural law of biogenesis says. Now that's pretty common sense, right? If you see something that's alive, you assume something alive was prior to that. True? Okay, we all got that. That's pretty much common sense. Evolution rejects that. Evolution, what they're looking for right now is called abiogenesis, which is spontaneous combustion of life. That if you take things that aren't living, that they can create life. It's where you constantly hear the scientific community going, we're trying to create life by mixing these chemicals and all that, and we're hoping life starts from non-life. So they're constantly looking for this because they deny this. So the science of evolution actually denies the science of real science, which is the science of the law of biogenesis. Okay? That is one thing, and there's several other laws of nature that evolution denies in order to hold to evolution. Now, the second thing evolution rejects is this: the known fact that information only comes from an intelligence. That information only comes from intelligence. What that means is this: if you're walking down a beach and you see these numbers, and you see in a parenthesis 918 parenthesis 376-4963, what are you going to assume? Are you going to assume that someone wrote that? Or are you going to assume there's a stick in the water and the waves kept brushing it up and it wrote that out? What are you going to assume? Okay, you're going to assume someone wrote it. Why? Because there is definite information. If you call that number, you're calling my house. So you know there's information, and so you assume an intelligence wrote that on the beach, that it wasn't a random act. Now, let me give you a little thing about us. And this is amazing, which refutes this whole concept, because to still believe that information can start, because this is what evolution says. Information just started on its own, and it's just built itself. It didn't come from an intelligence. This is a random thing. Here's what we know about human life. Discussed these first two with you last week. Humans start off with 2 cells that come together, and they join, and they make 1 cell. Okay? That's how human life starts. 2 cells come to 1 cell, and then what we know is an adult 26-year-old is made up of about 50 trillion cells. Okay? So most of us sitting here right now, you are made up of about 50 trillion cells that hold you together and make you into who you are. All right? Now, what we know is inside all these 50 trillion cells, there's stuff called DNA. Everybody heard of DNA? DNA is instructions. Okay, that's what DNA is. It's instructions. And each of those 50 trillion cells have a whole list of instructions giving each cell its unique role within the body of what they're to do. Some of them build bones, some make blood supply, some make skin. They do different things. Some of them only turn on at certain points in your life and function for like 2 days of your entire life. There's some that correct DNA. If it gets corrupted, that goes in and destroys corrupted DNA and reprints new DNA. There are all sorts of different types of DNA in your body that do all sorts of things that allow you to still be alive today and build your body that you have. Now, that's not even the most amazing thing. Here's what's the most amazing thing. Understand all the instructions in the DNA in these 5 or 50 trillion cells at one point all existed in one. One. All the instructions in your 50 trillion cells that hold you together and allow your body to be designed the way it is, at one point were all in one cell. All of those instructions. Is that not overwhelming? Now, what evolution science will tell you is this. That's by chance. That just happened. It was a random act. It just happened. These instructions just happened. And they just happened so all 50 trillion cells, when you're fully grown, all work in unity and precisely to keep you together and keep you alive. I'm sorry, that defies common sense. That doesn't make any sense. What makes sense is if I find information, there's an intelligence behind it. And we see in our human body, there's a ton of information. Even DNA today, they're finding more and more stuff about DNA that it actually has 2 languages printed on it in the same spots that you have to read by 2 different pieces of other cells to read those instructions. So the way they describe it is this. It's someone that can speak in English and Chinese at the same time, and the Chinese person and the English person can both understand it in their own language. That's what they found on DNA. That's doubled even the amount we thought it had on it, okay? It's an amazing thing. Now, here's the final thing that discredits evolution, and it goes into very easily sexual reproduction, because there are 2 foundations that evolution is built on. One is small changes like when you see bacteria adapt to different environments, or fruit flies they take because they have very short lifespans. They put them in closed systems and they change environments, and over time they adapt from generation to generation. They take that and they go, those small things eventually can turn into big changes if you just give it enough time. So they have to convince you of 2 things. 1, that little changes can become big ones, and 2, that there are vast amounts of time so that you go, well, yeah, I can't really see that happening, but if you're playing with billions of years, okay, yeah, maybe that could happen. Let me tell you why none of that works. Very simple. Sexual reproduction, this is how it works if the evolution thing that disproves both of those foundations. We could use a mouse that has a 2-year lifespan. We could use a tortoise, which is one of the longest living organisms on the planet right now. It has about a 200-year lifespan, okay? So we could use a mouse or we could use a tortoise. Let's just go with a human and say we got 80 years. First thing they tell you is you have to have vast amounts of time, and then small changes become big. The most time you have is 200 years. So it doesn't matter if they tell you trillions of years or not. It doesn't matter. The most you have is 200 years in this scenario. And here's what has to happen within 200 years of a tortoise. You have to have the animal, and that animal in one lifetime has to become 2 new animals. It has to become an animal male and an animal female that has different parts. So there has to be vast numbers of changes, tons of changes. Now, you might go from this to this, well, that's only a couple of changes. No, if you think about the difference between the first animal and then the male and female animals, vast amounts of changes, tons, millions, billions, possibly trillions of cells have to change within one lifetime of that animal. So it has to produce an animal male, animal female. Then they have to know to come together and use these new parts that they've never had before. They have to come together to create another generation of animal male, animal female, so that it continues on. If that doesn't happen on the first try, what do you have? Extinction. Yet, most of the known world that we can see with our eyes reproduces by this system. And what they would tell you is every species, every animal developed that on their own. That same process, all did it on their own. They're not all from each other necessarily. They're different branches. They all figured that out on their own. Do the male-female thing in different ways, but they all do the male-female thing, have the directions, and none of them went, well, some they would say went to extinction, but we're still all here. You do not have vast amounts of time. It doesn't matter if they convince you of 10 trillion years. It doesn't really matter. You have anywhere from 2 years to 200 years. That's it. Now, does anybody think this is possible? When you hear it? No. It's not. That defies everything evolution tells us, but we know logically that's what would have to take place. But we're being told every day you are a random chance that just happened to come about, and there is no God. Here's what we know. There has to be. Nothing explains the stuff I went through last week with you and explains the life that we see today other than a God, and a God who created us, that we are created people with a purpose. Now, here's what's interesting. The Bible in the book of Romans talks about evolution in the sense of what man was going to do. Here's what it says, Romans chapter 1. It says, "For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and the sky," we talked about last week. "Through everything God has made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power, and his divine nature, so they have no excuse for not knowing God." I read this to you last week, but here's what the author of Romans is saying. A guy that lived 2,000 years ago goes, if you look at the sky, you can understand God, and if you look at his creation, you can understand how incredible he is. You can understand his intelligence just by looking at the creation. Then it goes on, it says, yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. That gets into what I said before. When you reject God and the concept of God, I can't even look at the concept of God, you have to come up with another narrative. That's what Romans is talking about. So they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him or acknowledge him as God and give him thanks. And they began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. As a result, their minds became dark and confused. Claiming to be wise, they instead became utter fools. Is that not amazing? Claiming to be wise, claiming to be scientists, not all the scientific field, but a certain segment, claiming to be scientists, and you're all idiots and we're all smart, you look at their things and you take some time to think about it and go, that's stupid. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't pass a smell test. And the authors of Romans is going, that's what's going to happen. Be on your guard. Here's what the Bible actually says about you. Here's who you are. Genesis 1:27, it says this, "So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them." We were created by God. In Isaiah 42:5, it says, "He," in reference to God, "created the earth and everything in it. He gives breath to everyone, life to everyone who walks on the earth." We are created beings. In Psalms 139:14, it says this, "Thank you for making me so wonderfully complexed." This author had no clue how complex he was, okay? "Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it." This author just looked at his body and looked at himself and went, this is incredible. With science now and what we know about the human body, you should be in awe of the genius of the Creator. It's unfathomable. The second thing that we have to remember who we are is this, is that we have free will, okay? We were created by God. We have free will. You are not a pre-programmed robot. You are a created being who has a free will to make your own choices in life. You're not a robot. Without free will, there's no way that you can genuinely love God. And there's no way that you can genuinely love anyone else. If you don't have free will to choose something and love it or reject it, you don't really understand how to love anything. We are people with free will. If you are married right now, you know you went through a process where you could have cut loose your spouse, even in a dating scene or whatever else, but you chose to do what? To love them. Okay, you make a choice. No one forces you to do anything. You have free will. We just know that. We can sense that we make our own decisions. We see free will established right from the beginning of the creation. If you go to Genesis chapter 2, back in the Garden of Eden, here's what it says. It says, the Lord God placed a man in the Garden of Eden to tend over and watch it, to tend and watch over it. But the Lord God warned him. So first thing God says, he puts Adam, he creates the universe, he puts Adam in there, and he goes, you tend all this. At this point, Adam doesn't have free will, okay? Because Adam has no way of choosing anything against what God would want him to choose. So technically, the only thing he can do is serve and worship God and do what God calls him to do. So he doesn't technically have free will. And then it says this, but the Lord God warned him, you may freely eat the fruit of every tree in the garden, except the tree of knowledge of good and evil. If you eat its fruit, you are sure to die. So right from the creation account, we see God creates Adam, and the first thing he does, he says, Adam, everything is yours. Everything. You can do whatever, everything is yours. But there's one thing I tell you. There's one tree over here, don't touch it. That's it. Just don't touch that one. By that, God entered in free will right there. Because what he allowed Adam to do there is pick or choose if he wanted to be obedient to God or if he wanted to be obedient to his own will. And free will enters the picture, and we see it right from the beginning. And James, the brother of Jesus, he writes this in James 1. He says, and remember, when you are being tempted, do not say, God is tempting me. God is never tempted to do wrong, and he never tempts anyone else. Temptation comes from your own desires, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to sinful actions, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. James makes it very clear. You make your choices. The devil didn't make you do it. God didn't make you do it. You do it. You make your choices. You have free will. You are a free will created creature from the Creator. All right? The final thing you need to understand who you are, is this. You need to understand that you failed. Okay? That you have failed. In Genesis 1:31, it says, then God looked over all that he had made, and he saw that it was very good. At the beginning, God looked over everything he created and went, it's good. This is wonderful. Look what I created. Okay? He enters free will into it. He says, this is wonderful. This is great. And what we know is this, from the very beginning, we choose to do our own thing. We failed to live up to the desires of our Creator. We rebelled against him. And we see it from the first man and the first woman, and we see it in our lives ever since. In Romans 3:23, it says this, for everyone has sinned. All fall short of the glory of God's glorious standard. We see there, right there from the author of Romans going, all of us is messed up. All of us have failed to be the person that God desires for us to be. In 1 John 1:10, it says this, if we claim we have not sinned, we are calling God a liar and showing that his word has no place in our hearts. So we see here again, if we claim we didn't sin and we are perfect, we're liars. We don't know what we're talking about. That's what we see in 1 John. So this week, I want you to remember your roots. I want you to remember who you are. Understand this. You aren't a random act of chaos. That's not what you are. You are not a programmed robot. And you are not your own personal God. That is not who you are. You are a created person by God who has a purpose for you. You were created and you have a purpose. You are a person that has been given free will to choose to love or reject God's affection for you. That is your choice. But we also must acknowledge that we have failed to live up to God's desire for our lives. But in light of that, I want to remind you of this. God still loves us. Even though we have free will and we chose and we failed, God still loves us. Never, ever forget that. Never forget how small you are so you remember how significant you really are in God's eyes. And don't ever forget, even though you are a failure, God still loves you. Remember your roots of who you are. Let's pray.